Okay, just a reminder, this is a continuation meeting for our budget. So we recessed on Monday and now we're reconvening, so can I have a mover and a seconder to reconvene this meeting? Coughlin and Austin. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Good morning. This is our second deliberation meeting of the 2018 budget. On Monday, we had our service partners present, and today we'll be diving into the township's budget specifically. So I'll walk you through a bit of a presentation here, and Mr. Chen and myself will be tag teaming today, if you will, on the presentation. So if you see me passing it off, it's what we planned on. Although with that said, I am suffering from a little bit of a cold, so I'm hoping my voice lasts. So with that said, let's look into the agenda for today. Essentially, we're just going to walk through budget process to date, just to bring council and the public up to speed as to what we've done so far with the 2018 budget. We'll review the council budget direction that went to council back in July of this year. We'll talk about the draft consolidated budget and what's involved in that, and discuss the status of our reserves and reserve funds and debt. And then I think today we'll probably just start to touch on the draft tax supported operating budget, and then next Monday and Wednesday we'll dive into the other items 5, 6, and 7. So with budget process to date, as I mentioned, on July we kind of started the process. We came to council with a budget directions report, and I'll discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes here. In August, we essentially started our draft budgets and preparing them, and they were submitted to Finance in October. There was a number of meetings, individual meetings with department heads, myself and Mr. Chen, and we went through each department's budgets with a fine-tooth comb. Then we had also a couple of senior management meetings to ensure that everybody was on the same page as to what we were bringing forward to council, and everybody was comfortable with what we were proposing to council. And then in November, the budget binders were distributed to council, as well as the budget was available on the township website around November 10th. And then, of course, on the 15th, we officially tabled the budget. With regards to timelines, as I mentioned, there was our budget deliberation meeting on Monday. This is our second one today. We have another one scheduled for Monday, December 4th from 6:30 to 9:30. And then we have the fourth one scheduled for December 6th from 3 to 6. And depending on the outcome of those, staff is looking for an approval of the 2018 budget on December 20th. However, that is obviously up to council to determine whether that will happen. So with the council budget direction that came forward in July, essentially the 2018 budget was prepared essentially on the notion that we are maintaining existing programs and services at our current levels, that we looked at incorporating costs associated with infrastructure, as well as providing a reasonable estimate of assessment growth. We do have a cost of living allowance or adjustment in the 2018 budget. It is based on the 12-month Ontario Consumer Price Index average, which is from June 2016 to May 2017, and it equates to 1.84%. Again, the budget was also based on what our anticipated workloads are for 2018. Finally, we also as you may recall, in November, council did pass or approve the water and wastewater rates. We updated our water and wastewater rate study, and essentially the outcome of that was that our water rates would not increase, and so essentially no increase in water rates over 2017 rates. However, on the wastewater side, we are looking at a 3.7% increase over the 2017 rates. And then finally, any new initiatives and or new positions or changes have been proposed in program changes, and we'll discuss those a little bit more in the presentation. So diving into the draft consolidated budget, you may recall this slide deck, and it's just kind of hopefully gives the framework as to how our budgets are built. So if we start at the bottom, we essentially have 3 operating budgets that the township is responsible for. We have a tax-based operating budget, which essentially is funded by a number of sources, but the default is property taxes. We have our water rate-based operating budget, which is funded from water rates, and we have our wastewater rate-based operating budget, which is funded from wastewater rates. Then in the middle, we have our capital budget and 6-year plan, which we'll discuss on December 6th. And then obviously at the very top, we combine all 4 of those budgets and we have a consolidated budget, which I'll speak to now. So from a consolidated perspective, we have a tax supported operating budget. We have, from a gross expenditure side of things, we have an increase of roughly $1.4 million in expenditures. Our water operating budget is actually, we've done some refinements to that, and we're actually looking at a slight decrease over 2017's budget. The wastewater operating budget, similar. We also have proposing a decrease on the expenditure side for wastewater. On the capital side, we do have a fairly aggressive and a fairly significant investment in capital, or proposing a significant investment in capital. So you're looking at gross expenditures increasing by about $4.6 million on the capital. Overall, all combined, you're looking at about a $5.8 million increase in expenditures. This does not include any program changes, so we'll discuss that in a second here. On the gross revenue side of things, similarly, we have a almost $1.3 million increase in revenues on the tax side. Water and wastewater essentially are 100% funded, so again, those are similar to what you saw on the previous slide, as well as the capital budget is 100% funded. So when we look at gross revenues, you're looking at about a $5.7 million increase in revenues. And then what we tried to provide here too is a comparison from 2017 to 2018 as it relates to what the net levy requirement. So when I say net levy, meaning our gross expenditures are exceeding our gross revenues. So before any program changes, we had a net levy last year of $187,000. This year we're looking at a $337,000 net levy requirement. If we add in the program changes that were approved in 2017 of $156, the net levy requirement was $344,000 in 2017. If we add in the $240,000 program changes for 2018, you're looking at a $577,000 net levy requirement. What does that all equate to? Essentially, on the township side, it would equate to roughly a $45 increase over, and this is assuming a average residential assessment of $422,584. So a $44 or $45 increase over 2017, or 3.1%. The county has approved their budget, and I believe it was approved at 1.04%. And so with that in mind, that equates to a $12.94, again, based on an average residential assessment. We've assumed education not to have any changes at this stage. So if we stop there, essentially it would be a $57 or $58 increase, or 1.68%. But we are proposing a change in the policing charge of $10. So overall, we're looking at essentially a $68 increase, or 1.85%, again, based on an average residential property of $422,584. And again, the highlight in red, this does not assume any program changes at this stage. So the next 2 slides, we tried to provide a little bit more information on the allocation of taxes for 2018. So as I mentioned in the last slide, the proposed 2018 budget would result in essentially a property tax amount of roughly $3,700, again, for an average residential property. This equates to roughly a $68 increase over 2017. Of that $68 increase, $45 is on the township side. And then at the bottom of this slide, we're just trying to provide more information to members of public and the residents as to, members of council, and residents, how your tax dollar is essentially split. So 40% is retained by the township, about 34% goes to the county, 20% goes to education, about 6% goes to police. This slide here, we tried, again, to provide a little bit more information to council as to how that $45 on the township's portion would be allocated. So essentially, the chart on the right shows where the dollars would be spent if council was to approve the 3.1% for the township. So for council, it was about $1.60. increase for general admin, which includes finance, IT, CAO, HR, clerks, is about $19. For fire, it's about $21. Public Works is about $34. Rec, Parks and Property, about $23. Planning, $12. Conservation, about $2. And library, about $12. And then, of course, we have the addition of the corporate revenues, which aren't allocated out to the various departments, which helps us bring it down to the $45. I believe at our last meeting, council had requested that we provide a little bit more information on various levels of assessment, and so this slide is meant to do that. So we've tried to provide as much of a range as we can, I guess. If council would like another range, we can do that. Again, this is just based on the township's portion only of the property tax bill and does not include program changes at this stage. So you can see that essentially for every $100,000 in assessment, the proposed increase would be $10.62. Okay.
Councilor McConkey?
So if I look at the 550,000 and it's 3.1, that's what what's the blended amount that they're going to pay?
Director Schmidt?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor McConkey. We haven't done those calculations at this stage, and I guess the reason being is that we can do that, but council really has control over the township's portion. And so once we kind of nail that down, we can provide the blended, or if you would like to see the blended, we can provide those at another meeting. We don't have those with us today.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Director Smith, so just to repeat, the presumption on slide 14 then is township only, additional program changes. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And no policing.
And no police.
No policing. No.
So really, it's
It's the 3.1% is what we put here, which essentially is what council has control over, if you will. Obviously, you have control over the policing as well, but we just simply wanted to put this out to council with the 3.1. Again, if council would like to see it with the blended, we can do that.
Yeah, it's just a matter of adding some columns if we want to see the comparator. I guess we can do that at any time, even as we go through it. I mean, it'd be a fairly easy exercise. Councilor McConkey, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I would just say I would like to request that we get the blended as well in the
Yeah.
column.
I think in previous years, we've, once we've established what it is that we accept and add and take away, you real time give us that number pretty much.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. No, and I think your spread is quite adequate to give a really good feeling. And yeah, if we just extend it even for our next meeting, if you just want to update this one slide so
Sure.
we can track it until we do nail it down, and then we'll know exactly what the impact is
Sure.
across the board. Anyway, thank you. Carry on.
So this slide here is to provide a bit of information to members of council on the historical tax increases that have happened since 2014. And so starting at the top essentially is the spring water or the township's net tax levy increase. That's been approved for 2014 to 2017, as well as what's proposed in 2018. And then we tried to mirror in what the net tax levy dollar increase was year over year, as well as we brought in the county's net tax levy increase. And then we showed what the blended increase was, as well as what the blended tax dollar increase was, again, on average residential properties. So you can see a little bit of where we have been and where we may be going.
I just want to kind of make a note, if you look at that, the proposed, and this is where I have an issue, effectively it's almost it's a 40% increase. Or if you look at the previous years, it may have been around 20, even in the high ones. So anyway, I think that is a concern, but carry on.
So the next slide is just to give a heads up to members of council, again, about the program changes that are being proposed in 2018. So we will discuss a little bit more in detail each one of the program changes, but at a high level, staff is proposing essentially program changes that equate to a net tax levy impact of roughly $193,000 or 1.78%. And then obviously on Monday, you had the conversation with the library about their program change, which equated to $46,000 or 0.43%. In total, it's a $239,000 or $240,000 increase or 2.21%. And again, that would be on top of the 3.1 that we've provided earlier. So again, what does all that equate to? I'm always hesitant to provide this slide because it's on the presumption that all program changes would be approved. But this is what the impact would be should council wish to approve all the program changes and the base. Essentially, it would be a 5.31% increase or $77 over 2017, again, for an average residential assessment. The county wouldn't change. The policing wouldn't change. Overall, it would be roughly about a $100 increase or a 2.72% blended for an average home assessed at $422,000. Again, this assumes all program changes are included. Any other questions from members of council on any of that before I dive into reserves and such?
No, but just carrying on my theme, if you look at all program changes in, it would be twice the increase of last year. Councillor McConkey?
One comment, when on all program changes in, have staff looked in and identified their top 3 priorities in their program changes, or their top, if they're asking for 2 or 1, something like that, or has the CAO got any recommendations? Because it's council is here and we start questioning, you know, and are we really here to question what your priorities are? I don't like to do that, but I do like to question the rising costs. So I just, in the end, I sort of like to see if staff has some recommendations too.
CEO Brindley, I think obviously the program changes have been from different departments, so I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to say, okay, if we were focused on kind of controlling the increase, is there some that we'd be more willing to forego than others? I guess that's what Councillor McConaughey is suggesting, or have we had that conversation yet?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Yes, actually, the senior management team actually created the list, and actually it was probably another 4 or 5 items on that list. So we actually had a heart-to-heart session and knocked a number of priorities off the list because we felt and to do service for our ratepayers, there was a number of things that we took off the list, and the treasurer does have a number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. So the treasurer does have a priority list of the ones that we voted essentially amongst us, determine which department had the greatest need and which positions were of the highest priority. So the treasurer does have that.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor McConkey. Again, further in the presentation, Mr. Chen will be going through the program changes, and on the slide for program changes, further to CEO Brindley's comments, staff did prioritize them, and they are in priority order on that slide. So, yeah, we did have that conversation, and that's how they've been presented, if you will.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. Director Schmidt, does the slide 15 is the $7,000 that we talked about 2 days ago reflected in slide 15 and slide 17?
The $7,000 for the Severn Sound, is that?
It was CA.
No, this,
Severn Sound.
Severn Sounds, sorry, Severn Sound.
it has been removed.
Thank you.
There we go. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about our reserve status and where we've been with reserves and where we may be going with reserves. So as you may be aware, our reserves are made up of capital reserves and general purpose reserves. So on this particular slide here, from 2013 to 2017, and 17 is an estimate at this stage, our general purpose reserves essentially have been remaining fairly stable. whereas our capital has been slightly increasing over the last number of years and is projected to increase again towards the end of 2017. Keeping that in mind, as we look outward, and this is based on our forecasts and mainly due to our 6-year capital plan and the investments that are proposed in our 6-year capital plan, you can see that our general purpose reserves, again, are fairly stable. There is a bit of a decrease from 2017 to 2018, or forecast anyways. However, our capital reserves are obviously being impacted, and again, that is due to the proposed investment in our 6-year capital plan. So we are looking at using and utilizing some of our reserves to replace capital over the next 6 years. And again, purpose of reserves, we put money away for tomorrow, and ultimately we need to use them. So that's kind of the intent. So,
Director Smith,
Sure.
I'm not asking you to do it because we're not going beyond that in our capital. But do you have any feel beyond 2021? Is it kind of in a similar direction, or is it going, or I guess because we haven't done a longer-term capital program, you may not have any indicators, because when you look at this, you know, yeah, it drops and flattens out, but we're still in reasonable shape, unless some crazy thing came along. But I just wondered, you know, if we did look 10 years down the road, is there any indicators you have at all?
thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think at this stage, again, it's all based on the 6-year capital plan and what we do with the 6-year capital plan. So to the extent that some of those projects don't go as soon as what we've planned, then obviously these numbers all change, and hence why even the spreadsheet that we gave out to all members of council today with the status of our reserves and reserve funds, we stopped at the end of 2017 because these numbers will change based on even our asset management plan. And when we come to council with an asset management plan or a more comprehensive one, and we talk about contributions to reserves, then again, these numbers will likely change. Do I see it teetering right off? No, unless, of course, we have some drastic catastrophic issue that we need to deal with. But even then, you know, we may have other funding mechanisms to kind of help us out there. So on the reserve funds, we have obligatory reserve funds, which are essentially our DCs and our gas tax and cash in lieu of parkland. And then, of course, we have the discretionary reserve funds, which are made up mainly of water and wastewater, but we have a couple others as well. And again, they're identified on the spreadsheet that we provided to you. So similarly, our historical look on reserve funds, the obligatory reserve funds, again, being DCs, in 2014 there was a dip, and that was because of some of the investment that we had in our 2014 capital budget, which we utilized some of the DCs. And then, of course, building permit activity has started to increase, and hence our DCs have increased from 2014 on. With that said, you'll see that in 2017 they start to dip off again, and that is because we are continuing to complete DC or growth-related capital projects, and hence we're using those funds. As for the discretionary reserve funds, for the most part, they've been fairly stable. And again, those are mostly related to our water and wastewater reserve funds. And on this slide here, again, we're forecasting out to 2021. And again, some assumptions here based on what we thought would happen through the long-range financial plan, as well as what we're proposing through the 6-year capital plan. Our obligatory reserve funds, again, DCs, you'll see that, yes, they are declining. However, keep in mind that we collect DCs for growth-related projects, and once those projects are done, if we haven't identified any others, then we don't collect DCs. So hence, that's kind of what you're seeing. With that said, the township is going through an update to our development charge background study and bylaw, and so again, another reason why we didn't provide a detailed projection out to 2021 is because these numbers will definitely change once we go through that development charge background study, and likely DCs will change. And that will depend on projects that are brought forward, obviously. So,
Councillor McConkey?
I just have a concern that I want to talk to council about is that a lot of the investment from the DCs has come from my ward. And when I see the development and the forecasts, a lot of my development some might not start till 21, and some will be completed by then. And if I'm left with no DCs after the investment coming in, it doesn't look good for the investment community that's investing in the area. So I just want us to strongly think about how we're going to ensure that the investment that we're receiving in that area is getting the investment that they've put in. Because if it's depleted and they've already built, I'd be so totally embarrassed. Anyways, just think, food for thought.
Any comment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to
Schmidt?
Councillor McConkey. Again, our DC is township-wide, and we also have area-specific DCs. You know, if growth isn't happening, then we're not collecting DCs, and so, correct. And, you know, we have collected DCs from other areas in the municipality already that those funds haven't necessarily gone back to those communities. They may have gone to other areas in the municipality, so. You know, we can dispute it till the cows come home, if you will, but at the end of the day, the township DC is the township-wide DC, and at the end of the day, projects are proposed in the 6-year capital plan. If council doesn't agree with the timing of those capital projects, then obviously the DCs wouldn't be expended. The other side of it is that we do have some major projects that are proposed in the 6-year capital plan, and you know, if we don't have the DCs, then again, either the projects don't happen, or they're deferred, or we find other alternative funding sources, or we issue debt, and as we collect the DCs, we pay off the debt. There's a number of different alternatives for township or for the council to consider. But again, the DCs, I understand your concern, Councillor McConkey, and there are projects in the 6-year capital plan that are proposed for Ward 4. Will we have the DCs to do all those projects? Depends on development, depends on growth, and depends on whether people are pulling building permits. That's part of, you'll see that though through our development charge background study and bylaw update. We are projecting what the growth is going to be over the next 10 to 20 years, and that forms part of our DC background study. And also, we will be putting in the projects that we think should be going forward in the next 10 years. And like I said, that will have an impact on the DC, likely a higher DC, but we are still walking through that process right now.
Yeah, before I go back to, I think one thing we do have to remember is, you know, we can argue what's being spent where, but we're the ones that approve it. You know, we're the ones that approve the capital budget, and if for some reason, you know, and we've seen that. We've had some areas not request anything and then complain that we're collecting all the dollars, but nothing's happening there, but nothing's been requested. And I think you know, our councillors are more responsive and attentive to their areas now, and I think we're seeing shifts in our 6-year capital, which is appropriate. But we as a council get to approve it. And if there has not been money spent in an area, and yet the perception is a whole bunch of money collected there, well, I guess that's our fault, not the accountant's fault. I'll go to Councillor McConkey again, and then to Councillor Hanna.
I will not take blame for not having the area. The last few times that we had, there hadn't been a lot spent on recreation. A lot of it was roads, and you're correct. It was spent in the other areas, and I cannot argue against an engineering report. But since I've been on council, I have been questioning the need for area-specific DC charges, because I have seen the DC money that has been collected in the southern area be used throughout the township, which it's supposed to be, but it makes me beg to differ, and I'm getting this from my residents as well, whether the DC should be area-specific for recreation and fire and safety in my area, because I know Barrie has area-specific for certain things like that. So I could tend to go that way, and I'd like a question to see if it could go that way.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey. Again, we can have probably a more in-depth conversation when we bring the DC study and background study, the draft, to council. Most area specifics deal with water and wastewater. When you get into other services like fire or recreation, you may get into a situation where different levels of service will be provided in different areas of the community, which that's council's decision at the end of the day. You could have a higher level of service in one area versus a level of service in another area. And again, that's up to council. But again, I think probably a discussion we can have when we bring the draft DC background study, and we are aiming to have a meeting with council in the new year to kind of do a DC 101, if you will. And maybe that would be the time to have a more in-depth conversation on that with our consultant. So,
Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't want to get way off track here, but just quickly, Development Charges Act, does it not determine what we can make area specific, or do we have that option to make the choice as a township and a council?
Director Schmidt.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hanna. I believe the DC Act allows for area specific. Again, typically what I've seen is more in the water, wastewater areas. But again, we can have that conversation with the consultant whether it's appropriate for other services that the township provides. So.
And I'd like to make I'll go to Councillor Ritchie. Do you have a question, please?
Mayor French, I just want to comment. I agree with Councillor McConkey. I'd like to cite specific, like, I remember last year we were doing budget. We were talking about the roof in Hillsdale, and before you know it, the development charges from that development that's going to take place. Well, this year we've got boards in there, and maybe a little bit more in-depth study needs to be done in each area as to what we're looking for, and give consideration to that. I'm thinking of Marnie Lane, Apto Glen, O'Neill's Crescent, all this development going on. Where's the development charges? We've seen some things done, and I'm thinking about Phelpston, but we've got the boards coming next year. Maybe we need to take a little closer look. Maybe we could put a roof on that. But I'd like to explore that option a little further. So I hear what Councillor McConkey is saying, and in all the wards as well too, because and I know I'm repeating myself. I'm tired, but when this development starts at Midhurst, the oxygen will be sucked out of the room because it'll be all about that. So all these little wards that we've been working on, we need to pat ourselves in the back. We've done a great job. We need to continue doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a general comment, and some people don't like this. Same as I'm not a big believer in user fee. The concept of tax or broad-based kind of charges was, quite honestly, so the haves could help the have-nots. And when we do look at, let's use Phelpston as an area. If we were totally dependent on the development charges in Phelpston, to do anything, even for recreation, we wouldn't have enough money. Where, yes, we have big development in Center Vespra, and that goes into a general recreation fund. And I know some people don't agree with it, but the reality is we are a broad-based municipality with a lot of small settlement areas. And quite honestly, if they needed something on their own, they wouldn't be able to afford it. As a matter of fact, when we, the amalgamation, you think about it, like if Allenville was stuck on its own today, it wouldn't be able to afford a lot of things. So, and don't ask me what the answer is. And that's why I think the way we do it, where we have some, area-specific charges and that for things, it seems to balance it out. But let's face it, like Midhurst, Midhurst is, had some even small developments, then you could probably argue, well, the DCs for the pavilion could have come out of that, probably. Center Vespra, right now, they could probably, if we did area specific, they could build the biggest facility anywhere, but then the rest of the township, wouldn't have the money allocated to it. So there's that balance, and I've always accepted the concept that the haves pay for the have-nots. That was the idea of general taxes and DCs. But anyway, quite honestly, I'm comfortable in the direction we're going. And if we took every DC charge that we collected out of an area and was only spent there, there'd be a lot of things that we're not doing across the board. And when we do look at, we're improving Phelps and we're improving Hillsdale, we're improving Anton Mills, we're improving everywhere. And that is the idea of a community of communities. Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mayor French. On behalf of the haves and the have-nots and progressive taxation, thank you.
Carry on.
So just to complete this slide here, so we talked about the obligatory, and so on the discretionary side, essentially, you're seeing our discretionary essentially staying fairly stable over the next number of years. And again, that's more of our water, wastewater related reserve funds.
Actually, just one more question on that, because I know at the county, we have underfunded DCs, and so these are, when we say reserve funds, are these all funded funds, or are they just where they're supposed to be if we collected the money, if you know what I mean?
This is essentially money in our pocket, if you
Good,
will.
okay.
Yeah. So the unfunded is, we haven't presented the unfunded. That usually comes into the equation when we talk about our annual financial statements.
No, and I think it's an important point, because right now, we deal with at the county, we're basically unfunded in the DC side about $70 million. Just to be aware of that. So, okay, that's why I want clarification. Thank you.
So the next portion is talking about our debt, and this slide here provides some information about our existing debt or outstanding debt. So we do have outstanding debt projected at the end of this year at $4.8 million. Essentially, $1.9 million is related to roads, and the remainder is related to this administration center. This slide here always begs for question, but I will try to walk through it again with members of council. So essentially, this is trying to explain what our debt capacity is. So essentially, how the calculation works is that you take a look at your net revenues. So our net revenues for 2017, less any grants and contributions, are estimated at $17.8 million. If you take 25% of that, and that's the 25% limit that the province puts on us, you come up with $4.5 million. So that essentially is the township's debt limit, meaning that we can have annual principal and interest payments up to $4.5 million. That's the limit. Right now, the current debt servicing costs are about $671,000. So item D there is our repayment limit. We essentially could still issue debt and still be able to make annual debt payments of $3.79 million if council wanted to do so. So again, available debt capacity, we have about 85%, and we've used about 15% of our available debt capacity. Any questions on that slide?
Actually, I always like this slide, but sometimes the way we state it, because we know that we're allowed the 25%. So just so everyone's aware, and I'm sure they are, because it's a pretty easy calculation. So when we say 15%, really, if you want to turn it into a percentage, it's 15% of the 25%, which is, but we're entitled, we could go up to 25% of our.
Of the 17.8 million.
Yeah, and so we're really only at, 3% of that, give or take. And I think that's an important number to remember, because we have talked about putting policies in place of our debt servicing will not be more than 10%, for example. So even if we chose that, we're well under that still today. And I think that's why it would be a lot easier for us to implement a policy like that compared to, say, Barrie at this particular point.
Correct.
And even though they're trying to do that. So anyway, I think it's always good to put it in perspective, because sometimes the 15% sounds like, we're still under the 25. Well, it's not. It's 15% of that 25.
Exactly.
So,
Correct.
okay. No, I just wanted to make sure that's clarified. Thanks.
So the next slide here is essentially giving council an idea as to what our annual debt servicing cost would be in 2018. So again, we're looking at about $929,000 and $930,000. We are looking to issue debt in 2018 of roughly about $4 million, and hence why the road component is essentially increasing. The administration center amount is not proposed to increase. This slide here provides a bit of a forecast over the next couple of years, and again, a lot of assumptions here. It is based on the 6-year capital plan, and it does go back to somewhat of our conversation about DCs and not necessarily having all the DCs in place. And so staff has taken the assumption that if some of these projects are to move forward, that some of them would have to be debt financed. But again, similarly, if we can enter into different funding arrangements with other players, whether it be front-ending agreements on their DCs or whatever the case may be, obviously this slide would be drastically impacted. So again, this is based on our 6-year capital plan right now, and assuming that we don't have any funding agreements or front-ending agreements in place. In order to do some of the projects, we will have to debt finance them if council wants to move forward with them. So again, that's our assumptions in this slide.
Councilor McConkey?
Do we have anything that shows the forecast for the DC charges for the next, like from 2018 to 2021?
So on this particular slide here, the blue
Yeah,
represents the obligatory, which is the DCs, mainly DCs, and also gas tax and cash and loan parkland. So you can
okay.
see that.
But that represents the blend. That's what you've already taken out and put in. Like, that's not just the constant put in, because if I was to look at that in 2021, if it's obligatory and it's what you're collecting, that's, we're going to be gangbusters in 2021 with our Midhurst secondary plant.
Again, yes.
So-
So what we've done here is this shows the ins and outs projected over the next number of years here to 2021. We haven't really taken into account. I'm not sure what happened there. We haven't taken into account, oh, there we go, much of the Midhurst development at this stage. Assuming that Midhurst goes forward, EA is still undecided, if you will. And so we probably won't see building permits for Midhurst until maybe the earliest 2021. It could likely be after that.
Well,
So the projection right now is that there's not a lot of building permits or a lot of building activity in Midhurst in this assumption.
Follow up?
I would like to see what the projection would be if Midhurst was to start in 2020. Because, or like when the development community's out and somebody's asking when is the development going to start, they're saying next year. So again, that could be a little bit aggressive in our eyes, but to not put it in at all, and for my residents to look and say we're in $40 million in debt, and I've got a Midhurst secondary plan coming, and I have no DCs looking in these projections, it's really hard for me to talk to this about something positive with the Midhurst secondary plan. So I think we have to show a positive light here as well.
Director Smith?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor McConkey, agree. I guess from a staff perspective, we're taking the assumption that there is no front-ending agreements with Midhurst at this stage, and that based on our projections of when we think development is going to happen, which may not be in line with the development community, we're not assuming that the building activity is going to be any earlier than 2021. If council wants us to run some additional numbers, we can do that. But again, I would suggest that what we have here is simply a projection or a forecast. The numbers are going to change. We are going through an update to the DC background study. And so really the numbers in 2019, 20, and 21 for DCs is going to change on this slide. I can guarantee it's going to change. I just don't know by how much.
Councilor McConkey, and then I'm going to go to CEO
Okay, last
Brindley.
question, but basically the residents think 40 million. That's because we are putting in expenditures to look at a multi-use rec center and stuff like that. And the drive is from the development that's happening in the south end. So we don't have apples, we're not mixing it together properly to give a proper vision. To me, it has to show some type of development starting, or else we are starting too soon.
Quite honestly, I mean, when I looked at that chart, I was reasonably comfortable with it, because the reality is, and I think we have to focus on the one comment that was made. I mean, this would be the reality of it, because the DCs would be coming much later in the cycle, and we'd have to borrow the money to do it unless we have a funding agreement. So I think even if you move, even if you moved them up a year, you're still going to have the curve. Because that, and I think it explains very well why we need some sort of funding agreement, because, yeah, we'd be collecting it way down the road to pay for the libraries and recreation centers and that. So I'm not sure, even if we jiggle numbers around today, I mean, as a matter of fact, I guess if you want to do it that way, just change, move the numbers to the left one, and you'd still end up with a similar situation. The impact would be sooner. And that's why there's no discussions yet. We don't have any development agreements, and I think I'll go to CAO Brindley, maybe on comments, because I think you wanted to pipe in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The table itself, to me, shows, the earliest window that the development won't actually be any revenue coming in or anything until at least 2021. The earlier discussions with the developer were based on the environmental study report being completed in the spring. Now we're at the point where we might not even see the draft ESR from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change until the spring of 2018. It is without, I would say, it will be bumped up. A Part 2 order will be given, which will be another year. So we're talking about probably early 2019 before core infrastructure can actually get into the ground. And the core infrastructure is going to take significant, we're talking about massive main systems, building of sewage treatment plants, building of water systems, even before a house can be built. So optimistically, Councilor McConkey, I wish I could be more optimistic to this from a revenue standpoint, but I don't see houses being built until this time frame. I'm sorry.
I'll come back to you, but Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor. Director Schmidt, if you look at the current debt servicing costs on slide 26, 671,000, and then slide 27, you say the projected debt servicing is 929,500. So that's an increase of 258,000 or 38%, if my understanding is correct. Then I look at the binder on page 40, and you had additional debt, principal and interest at 173,000. Can you just clarify what the additional carry cost, principal and interest is for the projected debt for 218 over 217?
Dr. Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen. So in the 2017 budget, we were carrying additional amounts for debt that we haven't issued in 2017. So the slide that I was showing before of the existing, the 671,
Yes.
is simply our actual debt payments.
Okay.
But the budget actually reflects more money, because we had proposed to actually issue more debt in 2017.
Okay.
So the increase, so there's money built into the 2017 budget number, if you will, that helps lessen the amount that's required in the 2018 budget, if you will.
So the more accurate is the increase of $258,000 or 38% carrying costs.
That's
for-
the actual increase?
Yes.
But on the budget, the impact is the 173, because we are carrying some of that money in the 2017 budget already.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor McConkey? Carry on.
So again, this here is just based, I think, as I mentioned, on the 6-year capital plan and based on what our projections are at this stage. So with that said, I was going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Chen to kind of walk council through the draft tax-supported operating budget, and I will do that.
Thank you. So the tax-supported operating budget, just as a refresher, is just it's the budget for the day-to-day activities, and it's the core operations of the municipality. And as Director Schmidt talked about, within 2017, the deficit or the net tax levy requirement was 343,559. That included program changes. In 2018, the 337,223 does not include program changes. So the next several slides are intended to provide a detailed breakdown about what goes into the 337,223 net tax levy requirement. And in the first line, the township net tax levy of 190,441, what that stands for is if the municipality maintains its base operations, what that increase would be, and that's a 1.75% increase there. For the next 7 lines, those provide a detailed breakdown of salaries and benefits, and we wanted to provide this extra detail in response to council's questions around what were the actual constituents of the salary and benefit increases. So first is going to be compensation review at 188,938, cost of living adjustment at 108,104. The third item is Bill 148, the minimum wage increase in minimum wage requirements and related requirements, and then as well as merit increases at 18,295. Fourth item there is the annualized cost for new positions approved in 2017. And then the next 3 items relate to benefits. Life, health, and dental premium increase at 52,718. The vision premium at 5,519, and then the EI premium benefit at 1910. So the way to look at that is that those last 3 items are about the benefit increase is about a 0.55 net tax levy impact. On the next slide, the additional debt in terms of principal interest, the impact will be 173,538 or 1.6%. And then you have some other items in terms of, for example, Celebrate Springwater annual event, 39,500. The following item is a reduction in penalty revenue on overdue accounts for $45,000. What that basically means is that as a municipality is getting better at collecting taxes, is becoming more efficient at collecting taxes, we're collecting less penalty revenue. The flip side to that is that as we have more cash, we can use that towards programs as well as towards investments. Increase in contracted services for road maintenance is 83,105. And then these are offset by estimated increases in investment income of $20,000, as well as additional facility and ice rental revenue of $42,950. So just in terms of just the township budget drivers, that amounts to 8.04%. On the next slide, we talk about some of the budget drivers for service partners, and these are the things that council discussed on Monday. So library services, additional 91,167, and the conservation authorities, NVCA's general levy is 6,551. Their asset management levy is additional 3,099, and then SSEA's general levy for 4,996. So if you add up this total service partner budget drivers, that's another 105,813, or just under 1% net tax levy impact. So adding together the township budget drivers and the service partner budget drivers, while being offset by the estimated assessment growth of 5.91%, or 642,859, that's how you arrive at the 337,223 net tax levy requirement, or 3.1%. And again, that's before program changes. In terms of the program changes, I think council had asked a question about whether, and how the program changes were prioritized. There are 5 program and staff changes being recommended, and just further to CAO Brindley's comments, what the process that senior management went through was using kind of a matrix of looking at, for example, health and safety priorities, and looking at legislative requirements, and then looking at the strategic plan, and how each of the different, and so we use that as a filter or lens to really evaluate all the different proposed programs. And this was probably twice double the list, and this is kind of the refined list, and of course it's for council's consideration, and these do appear in the priority that senior management recommended.
Councillor McConkey?
If I go back to the slide where you have additional facility and ice rental revenue, I did not see any assumptions as to why we feel that we're going to get additional facility and ice rentals.
Maybe we can go to Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor McConkey. There's proposed rate increases in specifically ice rentals. We do a review each year, and there is an annual increase. And we also are undertaking a comprehensive review of all the community centers and other rentals, facility rentals such as sports fields, and looking at that and proposed increases to offset some of the additional costs we're incurring.
Follow-up?
When I reviewed it, I thought you were also talking about community halls. And so sometimes when you want, it's fine to increase the cost, but sometimes when you increase the cost, people pull away. So is there a communication plan, or is there any additional plan to ensure that that revenue, you're going to get value for your revenue? Like with the community halls, you know, we kept saying we were going to have a website that would show more about the hall. We were going to do certain things. Have we increased any focus on trying to market our facilities?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Your Worship. We are in the works of trying to put together a virtual view of all the community centers and trying to promote them. We're also seeing considerably increased use of our facilities. We've noticed that the pattern over the last couple of years, we are increasing. It's a different type of rentals compared to what we're accustomed to seeing from many years ago. But the use is increasing, which is a good thing. Along with that comes additional costs, but we're not looking at astronomical increases, just be incremental, especially with the community centers, keeping in mind the rates that have been established by the community groups over the years. We want to respect that and try to maintain the same philosophies. But, you know, some of the facilities haven't increased rates over the years to match the operating increases. So we want to have a look at that and try and make it even across the board. So we look at, per se, like a per square foot cost to operate buildings, as opposed to just throwing a number up in the air like they have in the past.
I think CEO Brindley wanted to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to emphasize that the increases are not focusing on the individual hall use. It's more on sports field and sports play. I just want to emphasize that also that the first phase of the website has been done. If you go to the facilities page, there's actually more information related to each facility. The next step is to provide more photographs and do more of the sales side of it. But already the website does focus more on the attributes of each hall and what's there, what's available. And that's already been done.
Councillor McConkey?
I'd just like to know when the virtual tour will be done.
Any comment what the expectation of completing the website update, CEO Brindley?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, no date yet, but I know that Nicole has been working on the photo library. That's the biggest part of it. And I would say very early, probably January, it will be complete.
Thank you. Councillor Austin?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor French, to Director Belcourt. On page 36, Under staff program changes, new initiatives, can you explain the need for recreation facility monitors, what their role would be?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Austin. Recreation facility monitors are being proposed to assist with the operation of the community centers. For example, when we have weekend rentals, up until now, we have relied on volunteers in the community to oversee some of the events if there's an issue that arises. What we're proposing to do is create a staff pool of part-time monitors, scheduling them to work weekend events based on the needs. They would only be scheduled if there were rentals for facilities, and they would be the township's on-the-site employee for events to ensure all the proper protocols are in place and to address any issues that crop up. Currently, if there's an issue where a community member can't reply, people do call into the township office, get the after-hours service, and then they have to try and hunt one of us down to try and go and assess it. We just do not have the current staffing to deal with that, which is why we are proposing the facility monitors. It's the next step, we believe, in taking over the operations and relieving the community members of any facility requirements and being able to focus on community development and events.
Just to everyone, I know Ron just spent a fair amount of time. That is in our budget boundary, why these positions and what the justification for each is. It's in each of the tabs for any of the additional staffing and those kind of things. And hopefully that does assist in moving us along. Follow-up, Councillor Austin? Okay. Councillor McConkey?
Slide 18, you talk about add assessment growth revenue estimated. Is that based on the assessment growth on the existing homes?
Director Smith?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey, it includes new and existing growth.
So what would be the breakdown on the new? Because the new, I would assume it's brand new taxation. So to me, the number seems a little bit low based on, we just had a bunch of homes go in last year in Stonewood Manor.
Yep.
It's going to be assessed this year. So just from their assessments, I'm sure. So I find it low.
Yeah, I think, and Director Smith and I had a conversation on this. Problem is, it's probably as much as 2 years of lag on some of this assessment taxes that we get. Maybe you want to clarify a little more
Sure.
detail.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey, the mayor's correct, is that there is a lag. Just because a house is built today doesn't mean that that gets put onto our assessment roll. So there is a timing difference from when the actual house is built and when the assessment that MPAC puts on our assessment roll. So usually 18 months is usually what we used to see. They are getting better. They have refined their processes, but there is still a lag as to when we actually see that assessment on our assessment roll, and hence we use the assessment roll to calculate our property taxes. So there is, unfortunately, there is just a delay. And to be honest with you, it's the assessed value of the home, not the sales value of the home, which we all know don't always match. They're supposed to over time, but there is usually a lag between. I guess what I'm getting at is if you were to sell your house today, could you sell it for the assessed value that MPAC has? 9 times out of 10, the answer is probably yes. There are some situations where the assessed value may not be what the sales value is, and there is a process for people to walk through to go to MPAC and request a reconsideration of their assessment. But 9 times out of 10, I would suggest that your assessed value is likely lagging behind what you could actually sell your property for. We only get the assessed value. We don't get the sales value right away. There's a lag. And so you're right. That number does appear low, but if you compare it to last year I believe we had around 156,000 in new assessment. Now we're at about 642. So it is increasing, maybe not at the pace that we would like, but that's the reality of the situation. And to your question about new versus existing, that is something that I constantly have a conversation with MPAC on. They just add it to the roll, whether it be an improvement or an alteration to an existing home versus a brand new home. They just add it to the roll, and so it is still a conversation I need to have with them, and will continue to have with them, to try to break out those two, because it is something that we want that information. It's just not readily available to us. So.
Thank you. Carry on.
So this slide on staff and program changes, new initiatives, is meant to be sort of an overview slide. Each of the department heads will speak in more detail about their respective proposed initiatives. But the thing I wanted to highlight there is just the net tax impact. If council chose to do all of them, would be 193,351, or a net tax impact of an additional 1.78%. For our service partners, the proposed change would be extended hours at the library. That for the impact would be another additional 46,426, or a 0.43 additional net tax impact. So with the township's proposed changes, as well as the libraries, the net tax impact would be 239,777, or an additional 2.21% on the net tax impact. So the base operating, just to kind of to review, is the base operating request is 3.1%. The net tax impact of the additional program changes or proposed program changes would be an additional 2.21%. So that would be, as per Director Schmidt's slide earlier, would be 5.31% if everything was done. This next slide is an overview about the change in net expenditures by department. We're going to be going through each one of these in great detail for all of the separate departments. And beginning, and this is just a continuation of that in terms of the change in net expenditures for the service partners, for the NVCA, as well as Severn Sound Environmental Association, as well as library and corporate revenues, and so that's how that gives a detailed breakdown. This in the preceding slides about the proposed net expenditures of $577,000. So in terms of, we're going to start kind of talking about the various departments now, beginning with council. That's tab 3 of your binders. The departmental budget here is going to increase by 5%, by $12,083. In terms of the impact on assessment, it's about 38 cents per $100,000 of assessment. The drivers of council's increase are due to cost of living adjustment and an increase in group benefits, as well as increased costs for mileage and travel.
Councilor McConkey?
Are we going to go to the detailed council tab 3? Because I made notes on that tab. Like, you made a comment earlier that some of the things can be gone to the tab. So we did not have this presentation in advance. So my notes in that were done on my tabs. So I just wondered, are we going to the tabs, or are we after this, or is, I don't know the
I would
proceedings.
suggest, Director Schmidt,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor McConkey and all members of council. So essentially, yes, the information is all provided for in the budget binder. How we're presenting it right now is now we are focusing on the various tabs. And so if you did have questions on the various tabs within the budget binder, now would be the time to kind of bring up those questions. And we'll do our best to address them at this stage.
okay, I guess I have 3. Councilor Austin?
Similarly, slide 33, 2018 budget drivers. At what point can we address some questions on that?
Anytime. What slide?
33.
33, okay.
Are those set in stone, or can we ask questions on them?
Through you,
Dr.
Mr.
Schmidt?
Mayor, to Councillor Austin. Essentially, what we provided there is what are the major things that are driving the budget for 2018. So now would be the time to ask those questions,
Okay.
if you had some.
Carry on.
Should I ask the question now, then?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm looking at the, on slide 33, the Celebrate Springwater Annual Event. Is that negotiable? Is it possible to remove it?
Everything is negotiable. That's what we're here for. And quite honestly,
I don't-
where does that show up in our actual line items, Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be under the Recreation, Parks and Property section.
So it would be best to deal with it
Okay,
probably at
thank you.
that particular point. If we go through them
Right.
somewhat in a logical sequence, it might be easier to follow and make notes, I'm just
Okay.
thinking.
Right.
Yes.
Fine,
Okay.
thank you.
Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chen, thank you. And before we jump into the tab for council, if we could just go back to your presentation, please, sir. Slide 35 and 36. And you came up with a final estimate for tax increase, 577,000. But if I take the increase on tab 36 of being 3.10, then I take the next slide 35 and 36, another 1.78. The next slide's of 0.43 on slide 37, and then 2.1 on slide 38. I get a total of 7.6%, 7.62% tax increase, and I'm just wondering why my addition is different than the estimate that you have.
Yes, Chris?
Through your mayor to Councillor Hannah, the slide 38 is a consolidated slide that combines all of the proposed program changes for the township. That's the 1.78% you mentioned, as well as the service partners, which is the library, for 0.43%. So in your calculation, I would probably subtract the 2.21 because you've already added that in with the 1.78 and the 0.43. We provided a very detailed breakdown about what goes into sort of each budget. So so that's kind of, I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, this slide is a summary slide of the previous slides that provide the line detail. I think, Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, if I can help. So slide 35, which represents the 3.1%, and slide 38, which represents the 2.21, which is all of the program changes. You add those two together, you come to the 5.31%.
Okay, thank you, because I was adding all of them together.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you'd put 2.1 in twice, if you like. Thank you.
Councillor McConkey?
So I have to go back to tab 2 in the detailed, because I think since your presentation now is at tab 3 and I didn't realize that. So if I go back to tab 2, I have a couple questions. I have number J, which is the increase mainly due to environmental study and drainage J, increase due to funds for community improvement plan, offset by transfer from reserves, Midhurst corridor study, partially an official plan update, and FCM asset management initiative, partially. I don't know what the FCM asset management is, and how much more do we have to spend on each? Because the community improvement plan, that one's being completed, so is that the amount that we're putting in for next year to fund towards it? So I'd just like a breakdown of those costs.
Again, my suggestion, but the council can do it whatever way you want. Those line items are covered in the tabs at some
That's what I'm-
particular point. No,
It's not detailed in the tab, it's a
Okay.
lump sum. I went through the
but,
tabs, and that's why I have my
would
question.
you like to address it now, or would it be more appropriate in the section?
He said
I can
he had
I can
a
address it
tab.
now, Mr. Mayor. Essentially, the community improvement plan As you may recall, council set aside $50,000 for that program, and not to implement the, not to spend money on a consultant, if you will, but to actually have money set aside for businesses and such to come in and actually request funds through that community improvement plan. So we did set aside $50,000. That is offset 100% from reserves, so there is no net impact on the bottom line. The Midhurst corridor study, I believe, is around $50,000 as well, of which 90% of that is offset by the development charges. So there's about a $5,000 net impact on that. The official plan update, I believe we put in about $100,000 on that, of which roughly 50% is funded from development charges. And then the FCM Asset Management Initiative, that's something that just we received funding from the Federal Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities, sorry. Thank you. So we received a grant of $50,000. The project is slated, or the overall cost is at $62,500. So essentially there's a $12,500 impact to the bottom line for that initiative. And again, that is part of something you'll see, council will see. We're having a kickoff meeting in the next couple of weeks, and council will be probably requested to have a meeting in the early 2018 to talk about asset management.
Thank you.
Carry on, Councillor McConkey.
The other question is number N, anticipated increase in annual operating costs related to GPS equipment purchased. Guess I need to understand, is the GPS equipment, I believe that's for Public Works, but when I hear GPS, I also think of the smart meters, but facility improvements required to the library, reseal foundation. I heard the other day Donna Kenwell say something about the washroom, so I wonder if that's included in it as well. And then I see that we got a replacement of the septic, so that's good. Like, I don't have an issue, but I just wanted to make sure, are we fixing the washroom that was spoke about, and what the GPS?
Carry on, Director Schmidt, if you want to take the ball on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor McConkey. So the GPS, you may recall that in the 2017 capital budget, we had funds set aside for fleet tracking, if you will. So not just Public Works, but I believe all of our fleet. And so there was money set aside in the 2017 capital budget to outfit all of those vehicles with the equipment. Now there is an annual operating charge for that. Obviously, and I'm going to get this wrong, but the airtime and or the internet fees, if you will, there is an annual cost to that. And so that now has been included in the 2018 budget in the amount of around $20,000 is the fee for that. With respect to the Midhurst Library, there is money set aside, as noted here, to replace the septic system, which is obviously, well, sorry, maybe not obviously, but is to help out with the washroom issues that they're having at the Midhurst Library. So that is proposed in the 2018 budget, as well as some other facility improvements at the Elmville Library, and as well as Fire Station 3 is requesting some replacement of flooring at their station there.
If I heard correctly, I thought Ms. Kenwell said the problem was with the Elmville washroom, so I just, maybe we could ask Jody?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey, there was an issue with the Elmville washroom, and a plumber was there, and it has now been fixed.
All right. Any other questions at this moment? Okay. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Now we're at tab 3. Yes. Actually, I have a quick question. It probably applies to Councillor Hannah and me. You know, when every time I see benefits, I notice Councillor Hannah and I don't get any benefits. Has there ever been any thought or any proposal, because I know certain municipalities do it, either extend the age for the benefits or basically provide a stipend or whatever? And it's just a general question, because sooner or later, I think it needs to be addressed, you know, but it was kind of a shock when I got a nice letter in the, you know, in May 26, you're turning 71, so you're on your own.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council. So actually, the manager of Human Resources and myself have been having discussions with our group benefits broker, Mosey and Mosey, and also our clerk with regards to council remuneration. So you will be seeing something in the near future coming regarding council remuneration. And there may be a proposal in there to look at maybe a pilot project for council as it relates to benefits, and whether we look at a health spending account, which would incorporate all members of council. But again, there are other options we could take a look at. Extending it beyond a certain age, again, that'd be something that council would have to approve, so.
No, I just want to note it. Councillor McConkey?
Yeah, I agree that something should be looked at for that, because, you know, people can run, and we just have, I think it deserves equal pay, or equal, you know, everybody should be treated equal. The other thing that I look at is the anticipated increase in mileage and travel costs. And I guess I didn't catch it back in July, where you assumed that, you know, we have a base budget and then this is the cost that things go up. Well, yeah, we know that travel and mileage goes up. But where I came from, when those types of costs went up, you said, how are you going to reduce it? And so when I look at this, I don't think that we should assume that it goes up, because last year I only went to one convention. And we had a pot for each councillor, a limit amount. I don't know if some of the councillors exceeded the limit. I know that some other councillors didn't go to the limit. So to assume that it's going to increase, I'll tell you right now, I won't be going on any conferences next year, as I'm not going to be running for council, so I won't be looking at that. So I don't believe that we need to increase these costs, and I know that there's funding within my budget, and it's this time of year, and I know before we took some money and from the mayor's golf tournament and made a donation to the food bank. Well, I understand maybe years ago, council actually used to get a $100 check at the end of the year, and that $100 check from each of the councillors went to the food bank. So if there is a surplus in an individual councillor's account or something, I would like to see that $100 or some type of amount goes to the food bank from this 2000, like not from the new budget, but from the last budget, because I know I was conscious of the money, but if there was an option where we could take some of that money to go to the food bank, I would appreciate it. I don't know how other councillors feel.
Well, I wouldn't support, like, any money that's saved, I like keeping. And if we want to make a donation, then I don't think we should be making it.
Okay.
But
I'd like to cut the travel costs
yeah.
then.
But I have a funny feeling, is part of this training, this jump because of incoming council? Is that part of the budget here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey and all members of council, essentially what we've been looking at is travel over the last number of years has increased, and it's more along the lines of this council is probably more active in attending different, whether it be meetings, I have to caution, so more meetings and or getting out into the public, if you will, as maybe previous councils. So we are bumping it up, or we're suggesting to bump it up, because that's what we're seeing. That's the trend we're seeing. It may change, but I would caution the comment about, you know, with regards to education or training and development, usually we charge, not usually, we do charge any mileage that's applicable to a training and or a conference to an actual training and conference account, not to their general travel account or mileage account. So what we're speaking about is increasing the mileage account specifically, because again, this council we've seen a trend that there has been more money spent on mileage, and that's just due to this council being more out into in the public, if you will. That's the trend we're seeing. If you don't agree with that, then by all means we can make a change to that budget line item. I would caution though about the training again is if people aren't using it, I would caution about reducing that, because once you reduce that, now the next individual in line may not have that money set aside for them. So yes, if you're not going to use it, great. That means that we'll have a bit of a surplus there, but I wouldn't suggest that we would want to cut it, because now you're basically cutting your base budget, which the next year we're going to have to come back and ask for additional money. So I would just caution you on that.
Councilor McConkey?
Well, I caution too, because we don't get a breakdown of the expenditure per councillor. And I would hate to see this budget be used and be extensively used by certain individuals. So I do feel that, and there are some instances where I did want to use the budget and you said, no, it's going to be used like for the signs and stuff. So I have other things that I would have liked to have used it for, but it was said that you didn't have to. But when you say the training doesn't come from here, it comes from somewhere else, our understanding last year was that our training was in here. So if I went to a conference, it came out of this budget, and that's the type of training that we go to. But I do agree, this council has been very active. We're asked to go out to many meetings, so the mileage part would go up, but it's the conferences that are a big dollar to us.
Comment, Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor McConkey. So I guess what I was getting at is the training, development, and travel are rolled up. They're rolled up as we're presenting them to you. They're actually each separate account within our financial system. So when you go to a training event or a conference, we do allocate the mileage that you are incurring to attend that to your training and or conference account. So the travel itself is or mileage is a separate budget line item in your budget, which is strictly for additional meetings and or attending meetings and such. So it's outside of the training component. I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Councilor Hannah?
Just for clarification, are we now going through council expenses on tab 3?
Yeah.
Correct.
So to that end, I would just suggest that based on what Mr. Chen has provided us, I added up, and I think you'll agree, it was a 5.31% tax increase. And if that is accurate, I would think that there's no way in heavens I'm going to support that kind of a tax increase on any budget. And if we're going to be cutting and slashing and burning to get down to a reasonable tax increase, I think we need to start with tab 3 being council's expenses. And the first thing I would suggest, that being that 2018 will be an election year, possibly we need to consider whether we need to do or should even be doing town hall meetings. And in town hall meetings, we've got an increase there of $1,000, bringing up to a total of $4,000 for materials and whatever else we do. And then in addition to that, we have staff time involved in these town hall meetings, which I think is considerable. So I would suggest there's something we could reduce by $4,000 right there by not having any town hall meetings in an election year. And I would suggest we should be removing that one.
Councilor Austin?
I kind of agree with I tend to agree with Councillor Hannah, but I also wanted to ask another point. Down under the variance explanations, E, it says that it includes funds for physician recruitment, $8,000, offset by transfers from reserves. I thought the funds for physician recruitment came out of the golf tournament. I'm not sure why it's under the council budget.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Austin. So the physician recruitment has always fallen under the council budget. Essentially, there's $8,000 under the other expense line item. So the other expense line item shows $15,500. Of that $15,500 includes $8,000 for physician recruitment, which is offset from a transfer from reserve, which essentially would be the funds that are coming from the mayor's golf tournament. So at the end of the day, there's an expense, but there's an offsetting revenue. So the net impact is zero to the bottom line. So it doesn't have an impact on the $12,083 which is the change in the council's base budget. So essentially, we have an expense of $8,000. We can't net the two from an accounting perspective. We have to show revenue coming in, and we have to show the expense separately. But at the end of the day, the bottom line equates to 0 for physician recruitment as a net tax impact, so no impact.
Councillor McConkey?
Well, if there's no willingness to decrease the mileage and travel costs, then I agree with Councillor Hannah that we should be sharpen our pencils, because I don't agree with the 5.1, and I'd like to second or go forward with how do we, if we look at that and want to decrease the special, the town halls, how do we proceed? I know before we handled it at the end, I just don't know at what point we handle that.
I'll take some guidance maybe from the clerk on adjustments as we go.
For any changes to this tab, if we table the motion to receive the tab, we can also ask for amendments. So the amendment could state that tab 3 be amended and with whatever the will of council would be, and then a vote on it, and that would carry through to bring to the final budget.
Okay, Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. And on the same line item, it says that the increase is due to town hall materials. What other projects or special events would be incorporated into that amount?
Town Hall, Director Schmidt or CEO Brindley, maybe you can comment?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have it in front of me, but the $1,000 would probably relate specifically to the town halls. There are other things that come from the special events projects budget for council, like the barbecue, the staff appreciation barbecue, and there's other things. So I'd be hesitant to cut that line. But if council's concerned about the $1,000, that's probably where attention may be paid.
Follow up?
Thank you. And my concern is the $1,000 and all the costs associated with the town hall. But before I pull back a number, I would need to make sure that whatever money is in there for other events remains in there, because for myself, it's strictly the town halls that I would like to see removed.
Okay, so we can provide that guidance that the town hall is removed. Councillor Hannah?
I agree, and I would also like to know where the mayor's breakfast falls in, if it falls in this tab as well.
It would be in economic development when we get to that tab.
Correct.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mayor French. While we're looking at ways to reduce this, the council budget, other expenses, the 2018 base budget is $15,500, and I think you mentioned that $8,000 comes from physician recruitment, and some of that is offset. Can you explain what some of the other expenses are, and might council have a look at considering ending those?
I'm not sure what, maybe you can explain the other expenses, but I'm just looking at year-to-date, it's been $3,000, so I'm not sure what significant difference that will make, but Director Schmidt?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council. So last evening, you may or may not have seen an email I sent to, directed to Councillor Coghlan, as she had requested other information on other expenses and other revenues, and so I copied all members of council. With that said, the makeup of the other expenses within council is $1,500 for community partnerships, which essentially is a $500 for the EDH commencement that we provide every year, as well as $1,000 for the County of Simcoe bursary program. Then there's the amount for physician recruitment of $8,000, and then we have the mayor's fund for $3,000 and council fund for $3,000, and that essentially makes up the $15,500.
Councillor McConkey?
On that, I remember seeing that note, but under other expenses, I think I also saw the Sports Hall of Fame. Where did that fit in with the other expenses? What tab?
That would fall under Recreation, Parks and Properties.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Austin?
So, just getting back to Councillor Hannah's concern over the, the increase on capital, council's expenditures, having listened to what the director said, that if we look at, the 2017 approved budget for other expenses, it was $14,000 that was budgeted. But if we look at the actuals to the end of September, it was only $2,600. So we may be budgeting a lot of money, but we're not actually spending it. So that might give us, a degree of relief over any increases that way. So it may be budgeted to be increased, but in practice, it's not being spent. That's how I'm interpreting this.
Yeah. And quite honestly, maybe it should be budgeted lower. Councillor Coghlan?
And thank you, and through you to Councillor Austin, the concern there is whether we spend it or not, we take it from the taxpayer. So that money comes out of their pockets where they could be using that money for whatever else they wanted. So if council doesn't feel that this is an appropriate amount to be taxing, then I think we need to take it out altogether. Not the entire line item, but definitely bring down the town halls. And the 3,000 and the 3,000 indicated by Director Schmidt, what would be into, the 3,000 for the mayor and the 3,000 for council? What is that, like a slush fund then, or why do we tax that additional $6,000?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan. So the mayor's fund, essentially, I believe, $1,000 of that, there was a motion passed a few years back where essentially $1,000 of that was to be set aside for long-serving employees, if you will. The other $2,000 essentially is, I think, some funds may be spent on other events, whether it be the Warden's golf tournament and or other type of events. For council, I believe last year we had a conversation, and I believe, no, actually, sorry, it was different account. Essentially, again, for members of council, it is somewhat of an account where members of council have discretion as to what they want to spend that money on. I think Councillor McConkey asked or spoke about the signs. That is potentially an item that could be funded from that. It's just an extra, some money set aside for a member of council to utilize should they wish to, outside of their training, outside of their mileage, outside of some of the other items that are set aside here.
Maybe to provide some guidance, maybe the best way of looking at it, if there's if there's like some reductions, instead of the 15.5, maybe someone would like to propose, our high actual in 2016 was 11,000. So does someone want to budget 11,000 or 12,000? And I don't think it should be totally eliminated because, again, when it comes into a new council at some point, some of this activity is, proved kind of productive and part of our commitment to be transparent and communicating and connected with the residents in that. And I think it's a very valid point, being an election year, that maybe the town hall should be eliminated. I have no problem with that. But I wouldn't want them eliminated forever. I don't think that's appropriate because we've got good feedback, good information that's probably impacted some of the things we do. But so I would suggest, when we, as suggested by the clerk, when we kind of do the resolution, let's put in some changes, whatever they are. Change the kind of others from 15.5 to 12 or whatever the case may be. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. And just as a follow-up to anybody that's watching at home or residents, the town hall is separate from the all candidates debates, and that would be in different line items, just so that residents don't feel that our council is holding back, so that residents won't have an option to listen or hear or find out who their new council could potentially be.
Yeah, I don't believe, we don't fund
that's not-
any.
they're two different-
Yeah,
very
we
different
don't
things.
fund anything to do with any candidate debate.
Correct. So what I'm,
Yeah.
my
Yes.
point was that we're not cutting those types of things.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mayor French. I'm prepared to move the suggestion you just made to reduce the special projects budget to $2,000 and the other expenses to $12,000. I'm prepared to make that motion.
Okay. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you. And something that I would be able to second, I'm curious if there's an opportunity for us to know what portion of special projects and events is $2,000. Does that cover everything aside from the town halls? Like, I think I would really like to know what those actual numbers are before we just throw a number at it.
Director Schmidt, can you assist us in that one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the reason why it's a $1,000 increase is because we have seen some increases due to the town halls. Do we have an actual allotment set aside for specifically town halls? No. So I think what we've been seeing those is that, again, we've been seeing that there has been some increases in that line item, and so we thought we might want to put an extra $1,000 in there to account for any additional costs related to town halls. I do not have a specific number that's set aside for town hall specifically, though.
Follow-up, Councillor Coghlan?
And thank you. So then the two annual, the staff appreciation barbecue in the summer and then the Christmas luncheon, are both of those out of this budget here? Or do we have an idea of what we allocate to that? Because I don't want to cut that. I think this council is, we're increasing funding for volunteer nights, and I think that sending a message to staff that we've just eliminated that would not be what this council would like to communicate.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan, and if I'm wrong, I will defer to COO Brindley. My understanding is that this budget accounts for the barbecue. It does not account for the Christmas luncheon. That's in a separate budget. As for how much the barbecue costs, I don't know if our manager of human resources has a better view on that. Again, I can go back and take a look at some of the expenses to get a better handle on it, but the details that you're asking, I don't have those in front of me right now.
Aaron, do you have a comment?
I don't have the details at hand on the actual cost for this year's staff barbecue.
But I would have to suggest it's under $1,000. Yes. Councillor Austin?
Under closer scrutiny, I'm again looking at this special projects events, and the base budget for 2018 recommended was $4,000. Approved budget 2017 was $3,000. But if we go back to 2015 and 2016, they were significantly higher. So how it went down from $7,000 in 2015 to $5,000 in 2016 to $3,000, so it's constantly gone down. So I'm just wondering if, where the difference is there. What was that money actually spent in those years, or actual would mean that it was spent, not just budgeted. Yeah, so what did we stop doing? Like we started doing town halls, but what did we stop doing?
CEO Brindley?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Austin, we'll find the breakdown, but I had a feeling at the beginning of this term there might have been things charged to that account which made their way into other accounts at a later time. Example, some of the expenses related to some of the mayor's accounts might have gone in there as it averse to when we realigned the council accounts. They would have been now in other accounts. So we'll have to find out. But there might have been things at the beginning of this term that might have went into that account, which we redefined in other accounts later as this council grew. So, but we will get that breakdown for council.
Okay, so other comments and changes on this particular tab? Because maybe at least we can start there and then find out where we end up.
There's an open motion, isn't
Yes, there is. And so just for clarification of the motion, I don't have a seconder yet. Okay, Hannah, sorry, what's that?
Yeah.
We need to table this motion first.
Question.
I thought we were approving and as we went.
I don't know what, be careful, Jack, because we don't know what we're amending.
Okay, so the way we're going to do it, is there a lot more comments on this tab? Councillor McConkey?
I don't think we have the numbers yet to recommend what the changes would be. So we can receive it with amendments to come in the future. That's all we can do. Like, to do a properly informed decision, we have to get the numbers, and staff is saying they don't have it. So how do we treat that type of motion?
CEO Brindley, you want to comment first?
Thank you, and Councillor McConkey has a good point of what we've done in the past years is we've kept a running total, but we actually haven't approved anything until later on because sometimes something might tweak one area budget and then you go back to another area. And so my suggestion, if it's okay with our Director of Finance, is that we sort of keep a running total at this time, no resolutions, and then later on we can actually get into something once we're more firm.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. I agree with that because we're coming up with questions, and Director Schmidt is and Christopher are going to get back information. So it's an iterative process that we're coming up with ideas, possibilities, getting more information, and then we'll be able to make an informed decision.
Madam Clerk?
For that, with that suggestion, under item 8.4, which will be the last item on the agenda, which will be dealt with next Wednesday, is to refer the budget to for final approval on the 20th. At that point, we can start with the amendments with council's wishes to remove certain items or add certain items. We can do it that way so that we go through the entire budget. Council can keep their notes on what they would like to propose, and it can be listed at that point.
Councillor McConkey. Anyway, don't say no to the clerk. The clerk is here to guide us.
Sorry for saying no. What I mean is, I don't think that that would meet our constituents' request of us. What we have to do is we have to understand before we get to the 20th and debate it on the 20th, I think we need a meeting prior where we have put together all of the amendments and we understand them. I don't want to be debating the amendments on the 20th. So I think, we have to look at our schedule.
I'll go to the clerk for comment.
Sorry, item 8.4 is scheduled for December 6th, so it wouldn't be at the final approval of the budget. It would be prior to that.
Deputy Mayor Allen, and then Councillor
Thank you, Mayor
Conklin.
French. I ask Director Schmidt, in that we will be wanting to get an idea of the cumulative running total of what impact these possibilities have, what's the best way for you to be able to facilitate and accomplish that?
Director Schmidt.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen. Ideally, if council is seeing things as we go through the different tabs and wants to essentially remove things, then I would suggest that you make the amendment now or at that point. But to the clerk's point, when we set up the agenda, we set it up in the way that for the service partners, we wanted kind of council to make a decision, and for the most part, you did do that. For the township, we didn't set up the agenda that same way because there's many different components of the township's budget that we didn't want you to commit to, say, council and or to fire and or to public works right away until we actually had presented the whole budget to you. So, there's kind of two sides of the coin is that if you see things specifically right now that you say definitely you want out, then I would suggest that you put a motion on the table and you address it at that time. If you are thinking that, hang on, you want to wait to see what other areas, what the pressures are in the other areas, before you make that decision, then I would suggest that, to the clerk's point, is you wait until the December 6th, then you bring forward all your amendments. We can compile those and they'll be voted on. And then we can bring back those changes on December 20th or another meeting to provide council with what those impacts would be.
Follow up, Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand that, but as we're seeing here, there are questions that arise that we would like to get more detail on before we can make a decision. That takes time for you to go back, you two to go back and do further work to provide information to us the way you did last night by email. So given that component, before we can make a decision, how does it best flow from your perspective?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen, on those specific items where additional information is being requested of staff, then I would suggest that we move to the December 6th. We'll have the information to council before that or at that meeting, and a further or a final decision could be made at that meeting, or an amendment or a motion could be tabled at that time once you have had the opportunity to review the information and make a final decision.
Okay, Councillor Coghlan?
No, and it was the same, yesterday when we were able to take the 7,000 out, it was easy, supported by council, and today we're asking for more information. I think that this is, it worked well last year, and if we can continue, that would be great.
I know last year, my concern is, I think this is going to extend budget talks and that, and maybe not accomplish a lot more. My preference, if permitted by the clerk, I think we should have resolutions requesting finance to provide whatever information and identify, the possible amounts that will be taken out, because I think the moved by Austin, and I think Councillor Hanna was going to second it, and maybe word it differently. Consideration, refer to finance, considering the removal of whatever that was, or changing the titles, and just clarification of the impact, almost like you do with the other things in the budget. If you do this, the impact is. Would that be maybe a good way of proceeding on these, where we're suggesting maybe we do reduce the 15 to 12 and take $1,000 out here or there, and but we may not approve it in its final form because it may have an impact. CEO Brindley?
Your worship, thank you, and maybe go to the clerk as well on this. I thought we were in one long meeting, 4-day meeting, so wouldn't the resolutions come at the end of that meeting as opposed to between days? That's my question to you, is that technically aren't we in one long meeting, and therefore,
Through you, your worship, we are in one long meeting, but the way we planned it was to have a motion to receive each section after we've gone through it, just to give a separation. It's easier to locate through the minutes and whatnot.
So, yeah, actually with that in mind, so we could use kind of receive it and, refer to staff and request, more information on these specific changes that we're proposing. Because that way, at least we get kind of the answers to the questions. There might be additional questions, we'll get to that, but what we're hoping is we go through each of these tabs, that we do kind of have the questions asked, so we feel comfortable taking something out, adding something in. I think it's the purpose of it. So is the mover and seconder comfortable with using that first line on your tab 1, 3 or whatever, and referring to staff, the impacts of basically, basically I think it's the impacts that we're worried about. Are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as they suggest? So I think the suggestion was, back to you, Councillor Austin, was changing the I think the 15.5 to 12 or something like that. And what was the other one? Taking out, yes, Councillor McConkey.
Excuse me, but we didn't suggest amounts because we don't know the amounts that are used for specific things. What we want is staff to go back and give us a breakdown of the amounts so that we know that we're not taking something away from staff and that we're just looking at Town Hall Pacific and stuff. So we need the breakdown in order to determine what we're going to take away.
Okay, my suggestion is we put in amounts and they tell us what the impact is, and those impacts may not be acceptable. And we know that amount won't be taken out of the budget. But if we just, because quite honestly, we're going to send them away, give us more information, so we're not exactly moving the ball forward in this budget. I think we should identify, so hopefully we can add up, because I threw out something to the director, somewhere, I'd like a couple $100,000 taken out of this budget. And I don't know where it is. And this would be a good start. If we go to 12, we're taking 3,500 out. If we take 1,000 out of the thing, there's another 1,000. Yes, Councillor McConkey?
So does that mean we can go back to tab 1, which is the overall budget, and do that motion like what you were saying? Let's just go back and take away so much so that it's a 2% increase.
You can always do that, but that isn't the, but again, to be fair to staff, that isn't the guidance we provided. And so we're going to have to identify what we want taken out. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you. Excuse my absence there. Would it be possible to have a motion read that special projects and eventing is only for staff luncheons, or just ask them to remove expenses associated with town hall? And that way, the number that comes back to us will be that number.
But I guess the all-encompassing, my suggestion, and council can do whatever it wants, but the reality is that's why, what is the impact? So if the impacts are that it impacts the kind of staff luncheon, well, we're not going to approve that change in the budget. Ultimately, I just think we narrow in the conversation to get to, if there's going to be reductions in here, we're going to have to identify it because we gave direction to the council or to the staff, and you know, we can second guess our direction. But the reality is now, if we want savings, we're going to have to identify them with the assistance of staff and take it out of the budget. And to me, here's the start of, you know, $4,500 or so. Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you. Then if we do that, then what I would suggest is adjusting the numbers so that we make them be the increases in these two instances. So $1,000 in special and $1,500 in others, with the proviso that the staff goes back and looks at what's affected in those two categories by pulling back those increases. And then we'll reconfirm that motion once we have that information.
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to members of council. So on the item of other expenses specifically, the $1,500 impact, $1,000 of that relates to the County of Simcoe bursary program. So if you remove $1,000, essentially you're removing our commitment to the County of Simcoe for the bursary program. So that is one impact that we're looking at. The other $500 for in the other expenses relates to an increase in the physician recruitment. We moved that from $7,500 to $8,000. So that's the $1,500 increase in the other expenses. In the special events, again, the $1,000 is essentially funds that were set aside to assist with town hall events specifically. So I'm not sure if that helps. One other thing that I'll throw out there is that to possibly help the conversation on other future tabs is, you know, I realize members of council want to be accountable and transparent and make sure we're being fiscally prudent, but if you have specific questions on line items that you want further details on, may I respectfully request maybe that you send us an email and we can have that information so that when we go through our discussion, we can have that information available for you. Just a suggestion, you know, if not, then that's fine, but it might help the conversation along, if you will, because we don't have all sets of details in front of us right here. So some of it we need to go back and research.
Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Director Schmidt. I take your point about the 1,000 and 500, but the point raised before was of the $14,000 budget last year, we've only spent year to date to the end of September 3,100. So I guess the question is, and yet we're wanting to budget the extra 1,500 to a total of 15,500. So we have to understand better what was spent, what wasn't spent in last year's budget before we can really determine this year's budget amount with 1,500 increase.
Director Schmidt.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen. So the biggest chunk that hasn't been allocated in that amount for other expenses is physician recruitment. So nothing has been set aside as an expense for physician recruitment as of yet in 2017. As of the end of September, that is. So we haven't recorded an expense there, so there's a large chunk right there, $7,500 to $8,000, which isn't showing in the year-to-date expenditures.
Yeah, I just wonder, because that is confusing, because it shows up in our operating budget, but it's actually funded from the golf tournament. Is there any consideration from a reporting standpoint? Could there be a separate, I guess, budget number that is a golf tournament, because it's not tax dollars coming in, and show where those funds are, so it doesn't kind of show up in here? Because you're right, so it's not really 15.5, it's, for the sake of argument, 7,500 that's going to other expenses when we think about it, and 1,000 of that, I guess, is the, now the one thing that you mentioned about the bursary, didn't we do that last year? I thought this started last year.
We did. And we didn't necessarily have the funds set aside specifically
No,
for
that's
that
fair,
in the
that's fair,
budget.
okay, that's fair.
Similarly, there was a question earlier about the 2015 actuals for special events. So since then, in 2015, I believe it was, the actuals of around $7,300. I think CAO Brindley had mentioned that there were a few things that may have been done in that year that we didn't specifically budget for. One of them was a $2,000 commitment to Cycle Simcoe, which wasn't originally budgeted for. And there's likely a few other things in there as well, so.
Okay, to help maybe this along, so for the sake of argument, is there general agreement that the two areas that we could look at reductions are the other expenses and the special projects? Is that where everybody wants to just focus? So on this tab, should we receive it and kind of direct staff to kind of provide detail on those items, and so we make an ultimate decision whether it's going to be reduced by 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000. Is that an acceptable way of doing it? Okay, so mover and seconder, still good with that? Okay, actually, I have a mover and seconder. I'm just, yeah. So, yes, okay. Well, I'll have to get the resolution on the table first before we vote on it. Yes, Councillor Coghlan.
Through you, Mayor French, I guess the CEO Brindley, have we advertised for any town halls in the early part of the new year?
CEO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll ask the clerk to confirm, but not that I'm aware that we have scheduled anything yet.
No town halls have been scheduled, but just to remind council that during one of the public meetings, the Hillsdale residents were told that a town hall would be provided to them at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and so we may have to kind of have a discussion and consider that, because that would be early in the year, long before any kind of, that's one advantage in this next election year. We don't know who the candidates are going to be until May instead of January 1st. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you. And if we can also, we had a bit of a cycle going as to the locations that we had gone to. And I know we did go to Hillsdale once for, I think it was specifically for construction update, or not specific, it was a town hall, but focused mostly on that. So I just want to make sure that we didn't skip anybody. We didn't say that we were going to go somewhere. Like when we cut this, I want us to make sure that our commitment to the residents that we had is fulfilled.
I don't think we've published or even suggested a schedule of them. I think there was a comment made on Hillsdale, but that was about it. Okay, the resolution, moved by Austin, second Hannah, that the 2018 draft budget members of council section be received, and that staff be directed to report the details of the special projects, events, and other expense line items. Does that do it? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. On to the next tab. Yes?
Just
Councillor
one
Austin?
final quick question. I take a look at 2017 approved budget, other expenses was $14,000, of which only 3,000 plus another 8,000 for, it all hasn't been spent. Any money that's left over from that 14,000 at the end of 2017, where does that surplus go?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Austin, essentially it would form part of the annual surplus or deficit position for the township as a whole. So similarly for council, we would go through all different operating cost centers, and to the extent that there was additional surplus, that we would report that back to council, and we do that typically in May of each year with our audited financial statements, and we ask council, or we recommend to council as to where the funds, those surplus funds may go. So you may recall some of them may have gone to our tax capital, our capital infrastructure reserve, and our tax rate stabilization reserve in previous years. So that's where the funds would go.
So they go into some reserves?
Correct.
Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tab 4 is the general administration departmental budget, and in 2018, the departmental budget is proposed to increase by 142,885. That amounts to an increase of $4.50 per $100,000 in residential assessment. The key pressures and what's really making up that 142,885 are basically three things: salaries and benefits. We've kind of talked through some of the components of that before in terms of the compensation review, cost of living adjustment, annualized costs for a tax utility coordinator position, as well as upgrading a financial analyst position. Second key pressure is going to be 2018 municipal election. That's fully offset through reserves. And third item is a study to improve the township's asset management. And that was also briefly touched upon before in terms of receiving some FCM funding, $50,000 of the $62,500. There are no requested program changes, and we're going to go through councils to respond to councils, to help council understand what is being delivered for the tax levy, the major initiatives for the CAO's NHR office. CAO is focused on operational excellence, and in that regard, there's he'll be providing ongoing corporate oversight and enhancements to open government, continued leadership training for both council and staff, continued implementation of the 2015 to 2018 strategic plan, a focus on effective and efficient government. That's going to be a theme that you're going to find throughout the various departments. Human resource management and succession planning and special projects, as well as legal review and claims administration, and as well as implementation of Bill 148. And I will defer to CAO Brindley in case he would like to add any points to that.
CEO Brindley?
Thank you. The big thing I'll note is the continuation, hopefully, with the leadership training. We've done online and both. We focus a lot on staff this year, especially as council's being aware there's been some push to organized labor. So we really focused a lot on really bringing a lot of leadership to the entire team through some of the sessions we did in the latter half of the year. So our hope is to continue with leadership training. This year, actually get into specific competencies as adverse to a broad brushed approach. So getting into a focused form of leadership training. We'd like to sort of bring back to council before May sort of a sum up of the strategic plan initiatives that have happened over the term of this government. And some of the things that I'm working on with HR is the implementation of Bill 148, as council's aware. That was just approved. And there are a number of things that are included in this budget for Bill 148, but there's actually a number of things that will still be coming forward in 2018 because those things take a little while to move through the system. So that will be something in the future. But it's really, as mentioned, no new items per se, but still very busy in terms of management of the team and Council, before the end of this year, will also see, we're just putting the finishing touches on the succession plan. The succession plan is an internal document, but it shows the efforts that we've done to make the department or the entire organization more resilient, and also prepare for the pressures of future retirements, to make sure that we have that second, third, and fourth row able to come up and take over. So that's what I have.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. Director Schmidt, I look at legals and legal fees. Year-to-date, there are 63,009 compared to a year-to-date budget of 23 and a total year budget of 35. And it's proposed to increase those 2,500 to 37,500. Can you comment on the year-to-date actual being so much higher than the year-to-date budget, please?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen. So you may recall, within general admin, we have, like as mentioned, the CAO, HR, finance, IT, clerks, and within clerks, we have the Joint Compliance Audit Committee. And so this is
I'll
a
just
summary.
make sure I declare a conflict if you're going into any detail on the compliance audit.
Thank you. And so essentially, this is a roll-up, a summary of all of those departments. So there are, within those legal fees, there are fees associated with the Joint Compliance Audit Committee, and hence why the number is what the number is at the end of September. Again, we haven't been budgeting for those legal costs because those are costs that we aren't planning on incurring in the future, if you will. So that's what that number represents. Also within the legal fees is just our general legal fees that essentially go through our clerk's department on a number of different initiatives, but also personnel legal costs that we've been absorbing over the last number of years for personnel related matters. So that's a slight increase from the 35,000 to the 37,500 is more along the lines of the personnel type activity.
What is your estimation, just to follow on if I may, what is your estimation of the full year actual compared to the budget of 35,000?
Sorry,
What is your estimation of the full year actual? So what will the 64,000 go up to by the end of the year with accruals or any additional? I'm just trying to get a total year actual to be able to relate it to a proposed 218 budget and the 217 budget.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen, really at this stage, that's something that I might have to come back to council on to provide you with some updated numbers on the legals. I don't have it readily available. I can tell you that as of September 30th, of the 63,000, roughly 38,000 was specifically associated to the Joint Compliance Audit Committee. And I know that I believe there's some additional costs that will be incurred on that matter. Whether or not we have additional legal fees, I'm not sure if CAO Brindley can comment and or if the clerk is able to comment, if they're aware of any other larger or significant costs that will be incurred between now and the end of the year.
As a follow-on, may I request that information then as an estimate of what the full year actual is going to be with respect to legal fees, including a component breakdown?
I guess a general comment, since there was an explanation of why it's over budget, I'm not sure it has anything to do with next year's budget, but again, if the information comes back, council can make that decision. CEO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, this comment has come up before, and we do try to estimate to the best of our ability what we use normally from the standpoint of normal legal advice. Our challenge is budgeting for the unexpected. And in this case, it's a compliance audit. In other years, something may come up that unfortunately, we cannot predict. And that's the challenge is we're usually pretty good at looking at our legals with respect to human resources and things like that. But there often is something that comes up that we have no idea that's coming up, and our apologies for that. We can't predict that.
Question, Councilor Hanna.
Thank you. Just before we move on from tab 4, am I right in my assumption that there are no new hires in general administration? Thank you.
I think, are we going to kind of review the other sections by the lead? Is that the intent? Like, I know you did an overview, and is the clerk going to do it? Okay, so, but questions, Councilor Austin?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor French, to the Director of Finances. Can you tell me why fuel and vehicle expenses are no longer listed in the budget?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Austin. So the fuel and vehicle repairs were relating to the one of the township vehicles, the minivan, which those costs have been transferred to our facilities or Recreation, Parks and Property department. So you will see those within their cost center.
Councilor McConkey?
On tab 4, we have the special projects and events in which we talk about it being election. Again, is that really just the election, or is the election driving up? Is there something else within that special projects and events?
One sec here. So sorry, of the 131, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McConkey, of the $116,500 increase, roughly $114,000 is directly related to the election expense. In addition to that, there are funds set aside for the Hillsdale Jail project, which is heritage related. Doors Open Huronia. And within that also is funds set aside for the Christmas luncheon for staff.
Okay, shall we carry on then? Oh, sorry, Councilor McConkey?
I know that we did put a focus on training with our budget with our staff, but when I look at the 2016 actual at 36,000, and now 2 years later we've doubled our budget. Any comment to that?
Maybe Director Schmidt or CAO Brindley?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll try first, I guess, through you to Councillor McConkey. You may recall that in the 2017 budget, there was a program change for more corporate leadership training, which the township did undertake in, I believe, October, late October. There was a couple of sessions on corporate leadership. And so those amounts would not be included in the September 30th year-to-date actuals. I'll leave it at that unless CEO Brindley had.
CEO Brindley?
Mr. Mayor, through the Councilor McConkey as well, there was also a number of corporate memberships and corporate things that are under this now. Example, the actual AMO membership, FCM membership for the whole municipality, I think FCM, sorry, is county. When it comes to MEPCO, there's a number of corporate things that are now under this budget line, as adverse that used to be under other lines. So first of all, if you go back to example to the 217, which is more representative of the expenses, approved budget, and then the additional 10, my apologies there, but my understanding is there's a number of corporate things that are under my department, essentially. So things that are attributed to, and I'm trying to remember, Director of Finance, there was a number, like I think there's MEPCO, AMO, AMCTO. There's a number of corporate things that are under ours adverse to individual budgets.
Follow up?
Okay, but if we undertook the training for the leadership or the, then if we did it this year, then we can take that amount away for next year because you've already done it this year. So really, the amount should adjust. unless we have a new program in training.
CEO Brindley?
That's why I'm looking at the 69 to the 71. I would actually have to have the director to understand why there's some increases in, because there is some ups based on new costs that are higher, but I'm not asking for an additional 10,000 for additional training. This is essentially, we're rolling over the same training numbers we received for the 217 budget, which will be in the 218 budget now, but I'm not asking for an additional 10. There is a minor up, but that's primarily related to the increase in individual memberships and those kind of things.
Follow up?
Excuse me, I'm following your train of thought where you're not asking for additional, but you did ask for additional in 2017 to implement a program. We've implemented that program, so why does that cost have to increase, have to be there again for this year? That's where my gap is.
Yeah, I think I know, I'm going to have CEO Brindley, but I think we finally have a wholesome program where we didn't before, and maybe Director of HR or CEO Brindley would like to comment, but I think we all agreed that the better trained our staff is, hopefully we're running a more efficient organization and effective, but CEO Brindley, you fill in the blanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, prior to the 217 budget, there was no money allocated to leadership training at all. All the training primarily was job specific, whether it was for a Part 1 course for the building department, they were all, so the idea was to start grooming our leadership. An example we brought at the time, because when we started working on the budget in 217, at the beginning we actually had Chief Schewel from Clearview here. An example is, I was asking for $10,000. Well, originally 10, but we were able to get it down to, originally 20, but down to 10. He alone took a $10,000 course, and so did the mayor, and so did the CEO for Clearwater in terms of the Schewel course. So that's $30,000 they spent on 3 people. I was asking for $10,000 for our entire team. That was the first year of implementing our leadership training. So in the first year, we did online training through the Harvard School, as well as did some training with the county through their dollars, and also we did a team-based exercise as well this fall with the staff. And I'm hoping to continue those initiatives with the existing 10,000 again in 218 to do more leadership training, because to me, we've just started it.
And actually, I know I spend a bit of time in here, and I've seen them all gathered in here in these workshops and training sessions, and I'm definitely a great supporter of that. Any other questions on this, Councilor McConkey?
Did I hear that we spent money on a chief that was just here temporarily? No.
No, it's Clearview spent that money. He was using the 3 times as much money spent over there as he requested. No. I saw that, your brow. Okay, it's one tab, but do we want to move on with the clerk portion of it? Is that what we'd like to do now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through your worship, I'm going to defer to the clerk to speak about the major initiatives for 2018.
Thank you. So major initiatives for the Clerk's Department in 2018. The biggest and the one that will take up the most amount of time is the management and execution of the municipal election. Implementation of Bill 68, which you will be seeing a report on the next meeting, which will provide you further information. A review and analysis of all township committees, which was directed through a notice of motion. The Midhurst Union Cemetery regeneration, that will be a 2-year project. You'll see, again, more further information during the capital program discussions. A rollout for the in line with the new term of council will be an update and configuration and launch of our iCompass web portal and meeting management software. So how you see and view and how we create agendas. Ongoing council meeting management and ongoing legislative functions. So our licensing permits, freedom of information requests, ombudsman's requests. And that would be our major initiatives for 2018.
Okay, any particular questions on that from council? Councilor McConkey?
I thank Director Schmidt for calling out or advising about the heritage being in this. Previously, we used to see the heritage budget separately. And I don't know if it's good or bad that it's all lumped in. One thing is it is a committee and it's working hard. And we were discussing some budget last night, and there's one initiative that didn't get completed, and it was like it's about being able to go out to the community and have the tools similar to economic development. When we go out, often get asked about what's heritage and what are some of the main designations and stuff. So we completed, the banners like what you have, and I think we even got them at a really good cost. So that was great. But we didn't spend all of the money that was allocated last year because we can't complete it. And I understand, and I think this is something that we need to understand, is we want to have a brochure, and we had the funding for it for last year to do it. And so if we run short next year of some money because it's been allocated, we either carry forward the $500 that was last year not spent, so that I don't have to request it again, because we've got a strong implementation plan for 2018. We actually have to fix up the Hillsdale jail because it's getting a lot of moisture and we're going to lose what we have, so we have to redo the floor, we have to do some parging on some windows. That exercise also was supposed to, some of it be completed last year, but as you know, we put a lot of work onto our recreation and that, and so we may have to go outside for an additional quote if we burden, our recreation with too much workload for some of the activities. So I just want to make it aware that if I come back to council to ask for more money, there are initiatives. And the other thing that I heard is that the reason we can't complete, doing the brochure, apparently we've done quite a bit of work and it's almost ready. It's just the timing, and we also have, our communications prime is very busy because we're trying to get out the rec plan, and I understand that the closing of the Barrie Examiner has a large impact on the work that now has been put onto that. So, and I wouldn't have known that without our discussion last night at Heritage. So I just want you to be aware that I ask for that additional 500 now to be put forward into our budget that we didn't spend, but we plan to do in 2018 because, we couldn't meet it because of some staffing and that, so I don't know how to approach that.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councilor McConkey. So the suggestion from myself would be is that when we review the status of our 2017 actuals and we report on where we're at the end of the year, there'll be a conversation with the deputy clerk, who I believe represents the township on Heritage. So it'll be a conversation with her to determine if there are some funds that need to be carried over to 2018. Then we may be able to propose to council when we come with our annual surplus or deficit that some funds be carried over from the surplus, if there is one, to Heritage. The other alternative is there is a Heritage reserve in the spreadsheet that we gave you. So there is an option to potentially draw on the reserve to help fund that project as well.
Yeah, actually, I want to throw something to the Heritage Committee, because we had a good discussion at the county. In the county, and now they're funding through their tourism some of the part-time summer student staffing at the African church, that was refurbished and so forth. And there may be some consideration of Heritage going to the county, asking for some funding for both capital and maybe an operating program that during the summer that maybe there could be a student there or whatever. So I don't want to discuss it at council, but I throw it to you because you're in the Heritage Committee. You may want to consider what you need, and because it is a tourist attraction, there might be some funding available from the county. Okay? Other questions of the clerk's information? Okay, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through your worship, I'm going to defer to the Director of Finance to speak about the Finance Department's major initiatives for 2018.
Thank you. So essentially, there's a number of initiatives that the Finance Department will be working on in 2018, some new, some existing. First one being obviously one that we had talked about earlier today, the update of the township's development charge, background study and bylaw. We're looking at hopefully having a final document in front of council by May, June of this year. Obviously, before we do that, we'll be in front of council to provide drafts and also a kind of a, like I said, a DC 101 kind of session with council. So stay tuned for that. The next item is, again, an ongoing item with regards to negotiating a funding and financing agreement with the development community in Midhurst. And again, this talks to some of the items that we talked about earlier as it relates to DCs. So we haven't had any recent discussions with them, obviously with the EA or the ESR still in draft form. Essentially, we're waiting for some direction on that, and then we will spark up those conversations again. 2018 is going to be a big year for the Finance Department as it relates to financial policy framework. Now that Mr. Chen has joined us, we have some extra capacity to actually focus on developing our financial policies, and those will be coming forward to council for your approval. Obviously, with the asset management is an ongoing initiative for all municipalities in Ontario. You're aware now that the township has received some funding to assist us with this. So again, we will be coming to council in the near future to provide a little bit more information on asset management and making sure that we're all kind of marching in the same direction. The last item on this page here is to implement new budget software. So you may recall in 2017 in the capital budget, we had money set aside to buy new budget software. However, which we did. However, the idea was always to implement in 2018. So that is a new project that we'll be working on in 2018 to bring forward new software. So what you're seeing here today may look different come for 2019's budget. In addition to those things, those initiatives, we're also looking at finalizing the implementation of My Spring Water, or we may have actually referred to this as Virtual City Hall in the past. This is an item that we've been working on for a while now with our vendor, and we have one small glitch that we're still trying to fix as it relates to the online payment portion of this. And so we are looking to hopefully have this launched in early 2018, so that essentially taxpayers and or ratepayers from a utility perspective can actually view their bills online and or pay their bills actually online through this portal. And the last item is just, again, continue to conduct process reviews in order to identify efficiencies and increase capacity. There are a couple items on our docket to take a look at as it relates to centralized procurement, and we're going to, now that we are essentially fully staffed, we are looking at trying to build some capacity in the department and rejigging some responsibilities to try to make sure that we can have centralized procurement for the township. So that will likely, you'll see that in early 2018 as well. So those are the major initiatives for the Finance Department for 2018.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. Director Schmidt, the finance expenses year-to-date are 31.5 thousand compared to a total year budget of 104,000. Now, the budget's 34.5 thousand year-to-date. So is there a big expenditure that's going to be hitting there soon to get up to the 217 total budgeted figure of 104,000?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Allen. Yes, essentially our tax write-offs. So our manager of revenue is looking at all of our tax write-offs, and so those typically come in the last quarter of the year, and so those will be coming in. She's likely still working on them, but I should have a number, a more accurate number to report back to you as to where we're at with that.
Other questions in the administrative side here, this whole tab? Because it looks like, I think this will be the last tab we can deal with in a wholesome manner before our scheduled recess time. Director Schmidt?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just the last item was just with regards to information technology. So if you'll oblige, we have our IT coordinator here who can provide some information on the information technology initiatives.
Mr. Bernie?
All right, so in 2018, I'm planning on replacing our server infrastructure. It's about 5 years old now. So going on to the 6th year in 2018, which is just slightly above what most people replace in between 4 and 5, sometimes 6 years. I've waited for this moment because there's new technology that would essentially allow us to put our storage infrastructure in with our server infrastructure. So essentially, it can save us a lot of money in storage costs in 2019. So I'm hoping to get new server infrastructure in there to improve our existing performance, I guess, and also save money in the future. And then beyond that, I'm coordinating with finance and building for software installations as well. And so it should be a leaner year for 2018 as there will be a lot of focus on the election as well.
Thank you. So any questions on this tab? Because I don't think we'll start into the next one. Councillor McConkey.
Do we have an idea of our revenue from how many FOI requests we've had and what the revenue is from the associated requests?
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor McConkey. Based on what I'm seeing here is we had an approved budget of roughly $500 for FOI requests. As of the end of September, we're sitting around $375.
Madam Clerk.
There are a number of files that are still currently open, so you won't see the full effect of that until the files are closed. The files that are open will run into 2018, so we won't know for a bit whether what the exact revenue will be on the rest of those.
Follow up.
Just a question to consider through to the clerk. With the rise in the FOIs, do you feel that the charge, like we may have to look at that at another council meeting, but the fee associated to it, is it worthy of the amount of work?
Madam Clerk.
The fees are legislated. We have no choice. There's only very specific aspects of the search that we can also charge for. So the majority of work that goes into an FOI, unfortunately, isn't chargeable.
Yeah, I think one of the exercises we go through in FOIs is, someone requests it and we kind of gather some initial information, go back and say it's going to cost this much money and say, okay, forget it. And we don't get reimbursed for that amount of it. CEO Brindley?
You just mentioned what I was going to mention.
Okay, so what we're doing, we're just receiving it. And, but again, we need to dig into each of these because maybe at the front end of each meeting, we can kind of do a catch-up. So as we go, as I said, I told you what my objective is, carve a couple $100,000 out of this budget, tax-based budget. I'm not sure how it's going to be done. Might be a few $1,000s today. So I need a mover and a seconder to receive the general administration portion. Austin and Allen. That the 2018 draft budget general administration section be received. All those in favor? Carried. Can I have do I need a mover and a seconder to recess, please? Coughlin? Ritchie. All those in favor? Carried. Oh, yes, and for those, we are reconvening on Monday, and this one will be an evening session, the 4th of December, starting at 6:30. And of course, like these meetings, we will be streaming them live, but please come out if you're listening and participate. Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French. I'd like to thank you both for the presentation today and the discussion. I think the notes and the presentation really help. I appreciate you can't get them to us in advance, but they really are well presented, and it makes going through it very interesting. And I would reiterate that maybe we should go back over and send questions to you so that you have some forewarning about the questions that we might have, and I think that would help us flow through these meetings.
Yeah, these are post-recess comments for the record.